Good evening, and welcome to Candlelight Sleep Stories. Settle in. Let the glow of the flame soften your thoughts, and the stories of yesterday guide you gently to sleep. Episode 1, World War II. Tonight's story is from the desk of Winston Churchill on the eve of World War II. Excerpts from his book, The Gathering Storm. Poland was attacked by Germany at dawn on September 1st. The mobilization of all our forces was ordered during the morning. The Prime Minister asked me to visit him in the afternoon at Downing Street. He told me that he saw no hope of averting war with Germany, and that he proposed to form a small war cabinet of ministers without departments to conduct it. He mentioned that the Labour Party were not, he understood, willing to share in a national coalition. He still had hopes that the Liberals would join him. He invited me to become a member of the War Cabinet. I agreed to his proposal without comment, and on this basis we had a long talk on men and measures. After some reflection, I felt that the average age of the minister who were to form the supreme executive of war direction quite high, and I wrote to Mr. Chamberlain after midnight accordingly. Aren't we a very old team? I make out that the 6 you mentioned to me yesterday are 386 years, or an average of over 64. Only one short of the old age pension. If, however, you add Sinclair and Eden, the average comes down to 57.5. If the Daily Herald is right about the Labour, we will not come in. We shall certainly have to face a constant stream of criticism, as well as the many disappointments and surprises of which war largely consists. Therefore, it seems to me that all the more important to have the Liberal opposition firmly incorporated in our ranks. Eden's influence with the section of Conservatives who are associated with him, as well as with moderate Liberal elements, also seems to me a very necessary reinforcement. The Poles have been now under very heavy attack for 30 hours, and I am much concerned to hear there is talk in Paris of a further note. I trust you will be able to announce our joint declaration of war at latest when Parliament meets this afternoon. The Bremen will be out of the interception zone unless the Admiralty takes special measures, and the signal is given today. This is only a minor point, but it may well be vexatious. I remain at your disposal. I was surprised to hear nothing from Mr. Chamberlain during the whole of September 2nd, which was a day of intense crisis. I thought it probable that a last-minute effort was being made to preserve peace, and this proved true. However, when Parliament met in the afternoon, a short but very fierce debate occurred, in which the Prime Minister's temporizing statement was ill-received by the House. Mr. Greenwood rose to speak on behalf of the Labour opposition, and Mr. Amory from the Conservative benches cried out to him, "Speak of England!" This was received with loud cheers. There was no doubt that the temper of the House was for war. I even deemed it more resolute and united than in the similar scene on August the 2nd, 1914, in which I had also taken part. In the evening, a number of gentlemen of importance in all parties called upon me at my flat opposite the Westminster Cathedral, and all expressed deep anxiety lest we should fail in our obligations to Poland. The House was to meet again at noon the next day, and I wrote that night as follows to the Prime Minister. I have not heard anything from you since our talks on Friday, when I understood I was to serve as your colleague, and when you told me that this would be announced speedily. I really do not know what has happened during the course of this agitated day, though it seems to me that entirely different ideas have ruled from those from which you expressed to me when you said the die was cast. I quite realize that in contact with this tremendous European situation, changes of method may become necessary, but I feel entitled to ask you to let me know how we stand, both publicly and privately, before the debate opens at noon. It seems to me that if the Labour Party, as I gather, the Liberal Party, are estranged, it will be difficult to form an effective war government on the limited basis you mentioned. I consider that a further effort should be made to bring in the Liberals, and in addition that the composition and scope of the war cabinet you discussed with me review. There was a feeling tonight in the House that injury had been done in the spirit of national unity by the apparent weakening of our resolve. I do not underrate the difficulties you have had with French, but I trust now that you will take our decision independently and thus give our French friends any lead that may be necessary. In order to do this, we shall need the strongest and most integral combination that can be formed. I therefore ask that there be no announcement of the composition of the war cabinet until we have talked further. As I wrote to you yesterday morning, I hold myself entirely at your disposal, with every desire to aid you in your task. I learned later that a British ultimatum had been given to Germany at 9:30 p.m. on September 1st, and that this had been followed by a second and final ultimatum at 9 a.m. on September 3rd. The early broadcast of the third announcement of the Prime Minister would speak on radio at 11:15 a.m., as it now seems certain that war would be imminently declared by Great Britain and also by France. I prepared a short speech, which I thought would be becoming to the solemn and awful moment in our lives and history. The Prime Minister's broadcast informed us that we were already at war, and that he had scarcely ceased speaking when a strange, prolonged, wailing noise, afterwards to become familiar, broke upon my ear. My wife came into the room bracing by the crisis, and commented favourably upon German promptitude and precision, and we went up to the flat top at the house to see what was going on. Around us, on every side, in the clear, cool September light, rose the roofs and spires of London. Above them were already slowly rising 30 or 40 cylindrical balloons. We gave the government a good mark for this evident sign of preparation, and as the quarter of an hour's notice, which we had been led to expect we would receive, was now running out, we made our way to the shelter assigned to us, armed with a bottle of brandy and other appropriate medical comforts. Our shelter was 100 yards down the street, and consisted merely of an open basement, not even sandbagged, in which the tenants of half a dozen flats were already assembled. Everyone was cheerful and jocular, as is the English manner when about to encounter the unknown. As I gazed from the doorway along the empty street and at the crowded room below, my imagination drew pictures of ruin and carnage and vast explosions shaking the ground, of buildings clattering down in dust and rubble, of fire brigades and ambulances scurrying through the smoke beneath the drone of hostile aeroplanes. For had we all not been taught how terrible air raids would be? The Air Ministry had, in natural self-importance, greatly exaggerated their power. The pacifists had sought to play on public fears, and those of us who had so long pressed for preparation and a superior air force, while not accepting the most lurid forecast, had been content they should act as a spur. I knew that the government was prepared. In the first few days of the war, with over 250,000 beds for air raid casualties. Here at least there had been no underestimation. Now we should see what the facts were. After about 10 minutes had passed, the wailing broke out again. I was myself not sure that this was not a reiteration of the previous warning. but a man came running down the street shouting, "All clear!" and we dispersed to our dwellings and went about our business. Mine was to go to the House of Commons, which duly met at noon, with its hurried procedure and brief stately prayers. There I received a note from the Prime Minister asking me to come to his room as soon as the debate had died down, and as I sat in my place, listening to the speeches, a very strong sense of calm came over me. After the intense passion and excitement of the last few days, I felt a serenity of mind, and was conscious of a kind of uplifted detachment from human and personal affairs. The glory of old England, peace-loving and ill-prepared as she was, but instant and fearless at the call of honour, thrilled my being, seemed to lift our fate to those spheres far removed from earthly facts and physical sensation. I tried to convey some of this mood to the House when I spoke, not without acceptance. Mr. Chamberlain told me that he had considered my letters, and that the Liberals would not join the government, and that he was able to meet my views about the average age to some extent by bringing 3 service ministers into the War Cabinet, in spite of their executive functions. And this would reduce the average age to less than 60. This, he said, made it possible for him to offer me the Admiralty as well as a seat in the War Cabinet. I was very glad of this, though I had not raised the point. I naturally preferred a definitive task to that exalted brooding over the work done by others, which may well be the lot of a minister, however influential, who has no department. It is easier to give directions than advice, and more agreeable to have the right to act, even in a limited sphere, than the privilege to talk at large. Had the Prime Minister in the first instant given me the choice between War Cabinet and Admiralty, I should of course have chosen the Admiralty, for now I have both. Nothing had been said about when I should formally receive my office from the King, and in fact I did not kiss hands till the 5th. But the opening hours of war may be vital with knives. I therefore sent word to the Admiralty that I would take charge forthwith and arrive at 6 o'clock. On this the board were kind enough to signal to the fleet, "Winston is back." So it was that I came again to the room I had quitted in pain and sorrow almost exactly a quarter of a century before, when Lord Fisher's resignation had led to my removal from my post as First Lord, and ruined, irretrievably as it proved, the important conception of forcing the Dardanelles. A few feet behind me, as I sat in my old chair, was the wooden map case I had fixed in 1911, and inside it still remained the chart of the North Sea, on which each day, in order to focus attention on the supreme objective, I had made the Naval Intelligence branch record the movements and dispositions of the German High Sea Fleet. Since 1911, much more than a quarter of a century had passed, and still mortal peril threatened us at the hands of the same nation. Once again, defense of the rights of a weak state, outraged and invaded by unprovoked aggression, forced us to draw the sword. Once again, we must fight for the life and honour against all the might and fury of the valiant, disciplined, and ruthless German race. Once again, so be it. Presently, the First Sea Lord came to see me. I had known Dudley Pound slightly in my previous tenure of the Admiralty as one of Lord Fisher's trusted staff officers. I had strongly condemned in Parliament the dispositions of the Mediterranean fleet which he commanded in 1938, at the moment of the Italian descent upon Albania. Now we met as colleagues, among whose intimate relations and fundamental agreement the smooth working of the vast Admiralty machine would depend. We eyed each other, amicably, if doubtful, but from the earliest days of our friendship and mutual confidence grew and ripened. I measured and respected the great professional, and personal qualities of Admiral Pound. As the war, with all its shifts and fortunes, beat upon us with clanging blows, we had become ever truer comrades and friends, and when, 4 years later, he died, at the moment of the general victory over Italy, I mourned, with a personal pang, for all the navy and the nation lost. I spent a good deal part of the night of the 3rd meeting the sea lords and head of the various departments. From the morning of the 4th I laid my hands upon the naval affairs. As in 1914, precautionary measures against surprise had been taken in advance of general mobilization. As early as June 15th, large numbers of officers and men of the reserves had been called up. The reserve fleet, fully manned for exercise, had been inspected by the King on August the 9th, and on the 22nd various additional classes of reservists that had been summoned. On the 24th, an Emergency Powers Defence Bill was passed through Parliament, and at the same time the fleet was ordered to its war station. In fact, our main forces had been at Scapa Flow for some weeks. After the general mobilization of the fleet had been authorized, the Admiralty war plan had unfolded smoothly, and in spite of certain serious deficiencies, notably in cruisers and anti-submarine vessels, the challenge, as in 1914, found the fleet equal to the immense task before it. I had, as the reader may be aware, a considerable knowledge of the Admiralty and of the Royal Navy. The 4 years from 1911 to 1915, when I had the duty of preparing the fleet for war, and the task of directing the Admiralty during the first 10 critical months, had been the most vivid of my life. I had amassed an immense amount of detailed information. I had learned many lessons about the fleet and war at sea. In the interval, I had studied and written much about naval affairs. I had spoken repeatedly upon them in the House of Commons. I had always preserved a close contact with the Admiralty, and although their forecast critic in those years, I had been made privy to many of their secrets. My 4 years' work on the Air Defense Research Committee had given me access to all the most modern developments of radar, which now vitally affected the naval service. I have mentioned how, in June 1938, Lord Chatfield, the first Sea Lord, had himself shown me over the anti-submarine school at Portland, and how we had gone to sea in destroyers on an exercise in submarine detection by the use of the Aztec apparatus. My intimacy with the late Admiral Henderson, Controller of the Navy till 1938, and the discussions which the First Lord of those days had encouraged me to have with Lord Chatfield upon the designation of new battleships and cruisers, gave me a full view over the sphere of our new construction. I was, of course, familiar with the published records, with the strength, composition, and structure of our fleet, actual and prospective, and with those of the German, Italian, and Japanese Navy. As a critic, and as a spur, my public speeches had naturally dwelt upon weaknesses and shortcomings, and had taken by themselves, had by no means portrayed either the vast strength of the Royal Navy or my own confidence in it. It would be unjust to the Chamberlain administration and their service advisers to suggest that the Navy had not been adequately prepared for a war with Germany, or with Germany and Italy. The effective defense of Australia and India in the face of a tumultuous attack by Japan raised more serious difficulties, but in this case, which was at the moment unlikely, such an assault might well have involved the United States. I therefore felt, when I entered upon my duties, that I had at my disposal what was undoubtedly the finest tempered instrument of naval war in the world, and I was sure that time would be granted to make good the oversights of peace and to cope with the equally certain unpleasant surprises of war.